ice and snow, where waddling feet go. Penguins in their tuxedos come to show the joy. From the pools to the skies, they play and frolic true. Welcome to Penguin Paradise, where every day's a new adventure too.
Welcome to All About Penguins podcast, the show where we dive into the weird, wonderful, and downright waddliest world of penguins. Each episode, we welcome a new guest, from scientists to storytellers, who brings fresh insights into the lives of these amazing birds. Get ready for fascinating stories, surprising facts, and plenty of penguin personality. Today, I would like to welcome Dr. Jeff White, a seabird ecologist and conservation biologist whose research focuses on penguin ecology, population dynamics, and conservation, with a special emphasis on New Zealand's crested penguins. He also holds a master's degree in organismal biology and ecology, as well as a PhD in evolutionary biology and ecology. So thank you again for taking time out of your schedule and to talk a little bit about penguins, especially crested penguins.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, what better thing to do on a Wednesday morning than talk about penguins?
I 100% agree. And as I was preparing for this episode, I read that you grew up exploring the forests of northern Mississippi, where you first developed your love for birds. And there are thousands of species of birds out there. So what drew you to penguins and seabirds?
Yeah, so I have to admit, I was not necessarily a penguin fan growing up. Obviously everyone loves penguins, but it was not something I ever saw myself working with. I actually wanted to work with, believe it or not, I wanted to work with pigeons. That was what I loved. Pigeons and waterfowl was where I saw my life going. So between undergrad and my master's, I was volunteering down in Argentina on a project working with hooded grebes, which is a critically endangered species. They're doing a lot of good work with them down there. But on that trip, I took a little side vacation day to Isla Martillo off the coast of Tierra del Fuego. And that island is home to a large breeding colony of Magellanite penguins, Gentoo penguins, and other seabirds. And for whatever reason, going out on the Zodiac to that island, seeing the penguins, the seabirds like in the water around me, walking around on the land like near the colony, that got me thinking about penguins. And so I spent the next several months in Argentina, just in remote Patagonia, up in the steppe, thinking about penguins and what I could possibly do to do penguin research instead. So that was kind of my spark into maybe penguins are actually pretty cool birds.
Nice. So from pigeons to penguins. Wow.
Yeah. I still love pigeons, don't get me wrong.
Actually, recently I found out there is a pigeon species that looks black and white like a penguin.
Ah, okay.
I don't know the name of it, but I recently found out this species. So
maybe that's the perfect middle ground for me, you know?
Yeah, maybe you should look into it, but still stay with the penguins, please,
yeah,
because you're doing amazing work. So stay with the penguins.
Absolutely. They're not going anywhere.
Great. And you've also studied all over, from Tennessee to Miami to the sub-Antarctic. What did that path look like for you?
Yeah, I started out actually doing my undergrad planning to go to vet school. I was in a program where I had to complete a few years of undergrad, and then I had a seat in vet school. And that's what I thought I was going to do with my life. And then due to some circumstances, I had to take some time off of undergrad. And when I finally went back a few years later, I decided vet school wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to go into field biology. And when I restarted in biology, I wanted to get whatever experience I could in that field. So I did an undergraduate research situation for I think 2 or 3 years, working in field ecology. And it was specifically looking at an invasive species of zooplankton in Tennessee and in Mississippi, which is where I'm from. And so that working with zooplankton, not that I want to work with plankton the rest of my life, but it was a great experience to get me into aquatic biology, into field ecology, and kind of developing those skills that have really helped a lot the rest of my career. So that was sort of the start. Then, as I mentioned, I went and did some volunteering in Argentina. That helped a lot with getting some field experience in a remote place, especially in a foreign country to me. That was my first real experience doing field work outside of the US. And while I was there in Argentina, I had that penguin experience. I was in contact with my soon-to-be master's advisor. And what the plan was at that point was I was going to work with sparrows and do some local project with grassland sparrows, which would have been really great. I was like, what if I don't do that? what if I work with penguins instead?
I
So
love the bat. I love it.
yeah, and he was very supportive. He was like, I don't have the money for that, but if you can find money and you can find a collaborator, we'll go for it. And so that's when I did some digging. I came across the Tawaki project, and that was a couple years. They had been around for, I think, a year or two at that point. And I reached out, I pitched an idea, and it worked. I was able to get funding for it. And that was sort of my intro into penguins. And then I've continued working with the Tawaki project and expanding in New Zealand pretty much ever since. When I did my PhD in Miami, I was originally supposed to go to Papua New Guinea as part of my project and work on ducks there, but COVID happened and that derailed everything. Luckily, I still had the penguins as my main project and was able to keep them through the whole thing. But in order to have something that I could physically do while we were on COVID restrictions for international travel, that's when I came up with this project looking at cormorants and hingas in the Miami area. So that's how I got involved with working in Miami. It was out of necessity, but also out of, the more I looked into it, we don't know a lot about these birds either. So there was definitely a lot of interest and knowledge gaps that needed to be filled there. That was pretty intriguing for me.
What a journey, really, like
Yeah,
all over the place with
all
all
over.
different kinds of bird species. But I like that you still go towards the penguins.
The penguins are the common thread throughout. I mean, I did some work up in Alaska. I'm now working in the Falkland Islands, but all the way through penguins have been, and New Zealand has always been my main focus.
You also work the Falkland Islands, and you have been like 12 times out in the field. If you compare maybe New Zealand and the Falkland Islands, how do the challenges the penguins face differ?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of differences there. So when you're talking about New Zealand, for example, there's kind of two regions to discuss. There's mainland New Zealand, and the penguins there have some different threats that penguins on remote islands don't have. So on the mainland, you have beyond the normal things like fisheries interactions, changes in habitat, and of course climate change. Those penguins on the mainland face more direct threats from humans, like dogs, for example, are a big problem on the beaches, especially for little penguins. So they have a little bit of a different interaction with humans there. On the subantarctic islands of New Zealand, you don't have those per se. In general, there's less land-based threats for most of these islands. The Auckland Island group still has some non-native mammals. Otherwise, most of the threats that they face are at sea. In the Falklands, you kind of have a similar mixed bag, but there are a lot more changes on land in the Falklands than you see on the New Zealand subantarctic islands, for example. So most of the islands that we work on in the Falklands are privately owned. So there are farms, many of which are really shifting towards a focus on ecotourism and restoration, which is fantastic to see. But they do have that added component of livestock to deal with, in addition to some sort of threats at sea. So they're comparable in some ways, but also pretty unique in others.
I didn't even know that in New Zealand, as you mentioned, that even there we have a difference about different threats.
Hmm.
And also the dogs. I read
Yeah.
about it that they can be harmful to penguins. So did you
Yep.
encounter any attacked penguin?
I luckily have not. Most of where I work on the mainland is in pretty remote areas on the southwest coast in Fiordland, and that entire area is a national park. So we don't get dogs there per se, but we do still have issues with other introduced mammals. Rats are an issue. Rats will come in and eat penguin eggs. Same thing with brush-tailed possums. They also eat the eggs. In some cases, you have ferrets or stoats that can take chicks as well. That's more of the mammalian threats in Fiordland. In some cases, I guess deer are also a problem because they can collapse some of the burrows. The dog issues are more in the populated areas, which tends to be home to very specifically to little blue penguins and occasionally yellow-eyed penguins. Fiordland penguins are less likely to be in areas with lots of people or dogs.
There are so many challenges penguins face.
Yep, they have to deal with a lot, but they are really tough animals, so they can overcome a lot too.
And have you learned something interesting about the crested penguins that surprised you?
Oh, well, crested penguins, first of all, they're just the best group of penguins. Yeah, there's been a lot of things that I've learned. I guess if I have to narrow it down to a couple, one thing about Tawaki or Fiordland penguins is they just are so different in most aspects of their life to other crested penguins. They live in a temperate zone. They breed in the rainforest. They are doing really well, which is not the case for most crested penguins. And part of that doing really well is that we actually see relatively frequently, depending on the colony and the year conditions, that Tawaki can often raise both of their chicks. And that's something that crested penguins just do not do. In a lot of crested penguins, the second egg is just lost. Like they get rid of it, or it's kind of, it doesn't have a chance. But in Tawaki, the two eggs are very similar in size. And if conditions are right, which for Tawaki, often they are, we see that they can actually raise both chicks, which is really cool and really surprising that they can do that when other crested penguins do not. I also have found with erect crested penguins, they live in two island groups in New Zealand subantarctic. One is the Antipodes Islands, which is about 800 kilometers off the coast of the South Island of New Zealand. And the other is the Bounty Islands, which is a little bit further north. And these two island groups, the penguin populations are behaving very differently in their numbers. They breed at slightly different times, a couple of weeks apart. And it seems like their foraging behaviors are also very different from one another. And I found it really interesting because the ones in the Bounty Islands had figured out how to completely just ignore the trend that all the other crested penguins do when it comes to foraging, especially outside the breeding season. In most cases, crested penguins go south. They want to go into those subantarctic waters. You can go toward maybe the subantarctic front, where it's really, that's kind of their trend. They go south. However, the ones on the Bounty Islands are like, you know what? Why would we do that? The subtropical front is right there. So they just go north, and they do a lot of their foraging up to the north of their islands. And so this has made it to where they're doing great because they don't, relatively great. They're stable. They go to the north. They're foraging in relatively close, productive waters. And the other population goes south to less productive waters and is doing not great at all. They have little gene flow between the two groups. They don't seem to mix all that much. So I found that really interesting that this one species separated by only a couple hundred kilometers can have such different behaviors and how that has such a strong impact on every aspect of their survival. So I found that pretty interesting.
I found it pretty interesting as well because it's something I didn't knew about penguins. And it's just, as you mentioned, one penguin species that has a difference like this.
Yeah, we don't know as much about them yet, but something similar happens in Snares penguins. They live in the Snares Islands. There's the main island group, and just about 5 kilometers away is the Western Chain Islands. And they also, the main group versus the Western Chains, have a couple of weeks difference in their breeding for some reason. Now, whether this has any sort of implications beyond that, like it does in erect crested penguins, we don't know yet. That's something we're hopefully in the future is on our radar to try and dig into.
And you also specialize in a lot of fascinating tools, for example, the movement tracking. So for listeners who may not know, can you explain how this helps to understand the penguin behavior?
Sure. So movement tracking is really important, and we can do that through various different tools, satellite tags, GPS, and others. And basically all this does is we attach a small device in the form of a little backpack onto the penguin, and they carry it around with them. It takes GPS fixes of wherever they are and sends that location data up to a satellite, or it stores it on the device, depending on what type of device it is. And then we take that data and we can recreate where that penguin was going. So, for example, during the breeding season, we might put a GPS backpack on a penguin. And when we get that device back, we can look at where that female penguin was going to find food to feed her chicks. And when we do that for a whole, group of penguins, we can then be like, oh, this seems like this is a really important foraging ground for these penguins. Or maybe we can say that different populations of penguins are using resources in different locations. We saw that a lot for Tawaki. When we tracked Tawaki from the inner part of fjords, we found that they are foraging within the fjords pretty much exclusively. In some cases, they don't go more than maybe 4 kilometers or so from their nest, which is crazy. But when we track the same species from the outer colonies in the same fjord, so only about 12 kilometers apart, those outer birds are foraging exclusively outside the fjord, out in the open ocean. And they're sometimes going 60 to 80 kilometers away to get food. So there's a recent paper, Marin Otis just had a paper released a few weeks ago that really goes into good detail on this. But we could use this tracking data to see these fine-scale differences within a species. And from that, we've learned that, it's not only the fjord ecosystem that we need to protect, it's the whole marine ecosystem outside of the fjords that are important to these penguins. And so it's a really good tool for conservation to really understand where they're going and what locations we need to protect the penguins.
As you mentioned, usually people imagine it like only a specific small island or area needs to be protected, but the penguins are really going all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, the Fiordland penguins, for example, we track them during their pre-molt trip. So that's the, 4 or so weeks between breeding season and molting. And during that time period, the Fiordland penguins, Tawaki, are making it a round trip of up to 7,000 kilometers just in that time
What?
period. It's insane.
This is insane.
Like, why they do it, we have some hunches, but, they leave the breeding season in bad shape. They're skinny. They've lost a lot of weight feeding their chicks, and
Mm.
the males are fasting for long periods, but they have to put on weight in order to get through the molt successfully. So, for whatever reason, they bypass really productive waters closer to New Zealand and go way out into, some of them split and go to the subtropical front south of Tasmania, and others go down to the subantarctic front. And then they just go out there, they do their thing, eating something, and then they come back. But they come back just so fat, and it doesn't make any sense. That's a really long trip. You would think they would burn off whatever fat that they get out at sea. So I think there's more to it, but I think we will have some more information on that. I have a paper coming out hopefully in the next year. They'll talk a little bit more about that and some of our speculations of where we can take that further. But yeah, penguins do some weird things that you wouldn't expect, and we would never know this without tracking data.
Yeah, I feel there is a secret the penguin have that needs to be discovered there.
Oh yeah, they have many.
That is true. There are still so many things that we don't know yet about the penguins.
Yep.
And you mentioned several publications. Also, I know that you have published or co-authored several of the papers on penguins and other seabirds, from genetics to diving psychology. And looking back, which project challenged you the most?
Probably the most recent one that I had come out, which was on population genetics of 3 of New Zealand's crested penguins. So the Tawaki, the red crested penguin, and the eastern rockhopper.
This one I read just recently.
Cool. Well, hopefully it was all right.
Yes.
Yeah, that one challenged me a lot. I am not trained as a geneticist per se, even though both my master's and my PhD were technically in genetics labs. I see myself more as a foraging ecologist, but I was encouraged by my PhD advisor to look at the genetics of these species and just see what is going on with their population structure. I'm glad he did. I'm glad he pushed me because, we learned a lot from that. It was challenging in terms of me learning new skills and new techniques. So luckily I had a great team of co-authors on that to help. But we got some great information. We now have really good data that Tawaki are very well interconnected across their range, which makes sense. They're doing great comparatively, and makes sense that they're well connected. We had the first suggestion of these are red crested penguins having these 2 distinct populations on these island groups, which is really important for management purposes, since the 2 island groups' population trajectories are very different from one another. And we found this rather worrying trend in eastern rockhoppers, suggesting that they have very limited gene flow and very limited genetic diversity, which goes along with their very, very drastic declines. So not great news for the rockhoppers, but it's good to know that and plan for what we can do in the future. And now we're bouncing off of that into evaluating all of the other eastern rockhopper populations in the region to look at them on a broader scale to see if the same pattern exists across all of the region.
I also read in the paper that you found there was a mixed ancestry in some of the individuals.
Yeah. We found a few individuals of the red crested penguins that did have some mixed ancestry between the 2 populations, not between species, but between the 2 populations, which, suggests that occasionally you do get a bird that will make it between the 2 island groups. So they're not completely isolated, but it seems like it's a rare event. We did find some evidence of kind of the opposite in the eastern rockhoppers. There's at least one pair of eastern rockhoppers that were close enough genetically that they might have been siblings. Again, that just goes into the very limited gene pool and limited options that they seem to have right now. Yeah, so there's some interesting results. I'm glad I did it.
I also understood that the findings tell us that we need to really look differently at the conservation efforts and the needs of the specific penguins. So
Yep. Yeah, it's not a one size fits all for a
yeah,
species.
exactly. And I would like to still go back to some of the field work that you did, because as already was mentioned, it was like 12 times you've been in the field. Like I feel you are always in the field out there. So I'm happy I caught you at home so we can have this chat. And can you give us a sneak peek, like behind the curtain? What does a day in the field studying penguins look like?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, being in the field, doing, working with the penguins in the field, that's my happy place. That's what I enjoy. It can be very hard. It can be very tiring, but it's also really rewarding and a lot of fun. So a typical day, for example, on Antipodes Island, which is where we do a lot of our work on red cresteds and rockhoppers, there's usually a small team of us from 3 to maybe 4 or 5 people. This last season, there was just 3 of us. On this island, it is a little difficult to access. So we go via sailboat. It's about a 3-day sailing from New Zealand to the island. We have to unload all of our gear into into the dinghy. We get the dinghy over to a little cove near our hut. And then there is what's called a flying fox. It's like a pulley system that we send down to the dinghy, and we pile all the gear in it. And then a group of us get on a long rope and we just run back and forth trying to like pull all the gear up.
Okay, a lot of pre-work before you are
A lot
actually
of
in the
work.
field.
Yeah, it's so much fun after being on a boat for 3 days. But yeah, it takes, maybe, 3 or 4 hours straight of doing that, getting all the gear up. So that's just getting onto the island. Once we're there, we cover the entire island. So it's not a huge island. I think it's about, I think it's like 6 kilometers across the middle of the island or so. But to get to the far side of the island, which has a lot of penguins, the biggest penguin colonies are kind of at the far side of the island, where there are no huts or houses or anything like that.
Hmm.
There's also no trails on the island. So to get there, you get up. Usually we're out of the house by 8 or 9. We're relatively late risers in that regard. And you just pack all your gear and you start walking. This island is challenging to walk across. It's covered in tussock and dense vegetation, and the ground is littered with seabird burrows, that you have to avoid so you don't crush them. It's a lot of ups and downs and deep moss, which makes it okay when you fall on it, and you fall a lot, but it's really tiring to walk across the island. To get to the far colonies, you climb over 2 mountains, over a mountain onto a plateau, down a mountain, and then down a really steep cliff down to the actual colonies. So there's a lot of ups and downs on this island. So we do a lot of different things. We might do drone surveys to eventually go through and count the number of penguins that are there. We do ground counts. We do nest checks and monitoring nesting success. We're catching penguins for blood sampling and for putting those devices on that I mentioned earlier for tracking. Yeah, so we're doing a lot of different activities. So we'll get to the colony, we'll do whatever we're doing for a few hours in the colony, and then you pack up, you go back up that cliff, go back up the mountain, and eventually make your way back to the hut. Yeah, we had one big day last season where we did kind of a tour of the entirety of the south coast of the island for drone surveys. And I don't remember, it was like something like maybe 13 or 14 hours of walking and droning and everything. I don't know. We covered a lot of ground and we were just absolutely beat by the time we got back. It's pretty exhausting work, but it's worth it. You definitely are in great shape by the time you're done with field work.
I'm just exhausted by listening to what you have to do just to get to the island.
It's a lot. For the Bounty Islands, we're only there for a short period of time. There is nowhere to stay on those islands, and we're currently only allowed to land on one of them. There's 13 islands. We land on one. I think it's 13. Maybe it's more than that. And for that one, sea has to be exactly right. We hop off onto the dinghy. They drop us off, and then it's about 60 meters straight up, more or less, of rock climbing. I mean, it's ledges and stuff. We put up a rope, but yeah, you climb up, and as you're going up the ledges, especially the first trip up, you'll pull yourself up a ledge, and you'll be face to face with a fur seal that's asleep, and sometimes it scares everybody.
It would
But
scare me.
yeah, it can be startling. I mean, they're just as startled as we are. So we obviously try to not do that and give the seals as much space as we can. But that's just an incredible island. The climb up it's gotten better. I was a little nervous about it the first time. The Falklands are a little bit easier in terms of like the walking and the terrain. We're able to fly to all of the islands. In some cases, we can take a Land Rover. Yeah, a Land Rover, so we can drive around to the colonies, which is a lot easier. I typically just walk anyway because I'm used to walking for field work. But in that case, as I said, they're mostly farms, so it's short grass and much easier to walk across.
And how do you mentally and physically prepare for working in like remote places like this?
Physically, I try to stay throughout the year a little more active, like hiking and trying to just keep up, especially your leg strength and stamina, because it's a lot of walking. But the island will do it for you too. It might suck the first few weeks, but when you're there for several months, eventually you're fine. Mentally, for me, I love doing it. Honestly, it's a little bit more difficult for me to mentally prepare to sit in a lab for months at a time than it is to go out into the field. But there is the factor of being away from family, having limited communications for extended period of time, which can be hard. And the best thing for that, at least for me, has been I work with incredible people. So my team that I work with in New Zealand, I've known the people at the Tawaki project now since almost 10 years. And we've been working together. We're get along very well in the field. I think we're a really good team. In the Falklands, I'm working with a lot of great people there as well. Having a good team that you can rely on is really helpful because you have a support network. And also, if you're with the right people that understand, if you need some time alone to just decompress and just go sit and stare at the ocean for a while, that's also fine. So having a good team really, really helps in that regard.
Good team always helps. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter which field you are working in.
Yep. Yep. That's the core. If you're with a bad group, it makes everything worse. But when you're with a good group, you can get through anything together.
Exactly. And what is one of your favorite memories from fieldwork? Like the first one that pops into your mind?
Well, I have two. The first one, it's happened actually twice, but the first time that it happened, it was my first season working with Tawaki, and I was going with Thomas Mattern. He's one of the co-founders of the Tawaki project, to our field site on the west coast of New Zealand. We were retrieving loggers, and so this site has a moderately wide, very rocky, like boulder strewn beach leading up to a sharp bank, which is where the penguins are nesting. So we're sitting down on those boulders, waiting for our bird to come back to get her logger. And sun's going down. I see a penguin coming up, and we're looking. No, it's not the one we want. So I kind of ignored her and just kept on our watch. So it had gone down for the most part. And I hear penguin feet coming towards me up the rocks. And I look, and she's this penguin that is half a meter away from me, just standing there. I was like, oh, hi. And
Oh,
then here she keeps going. And the next thing I know, she jumps and is sitting in my lap. And she's just sitting there.
no way.
Yeah. She's just sitting there, and she lands, and she just kind of like looks down at her feet like, that's a weird rock. And then she's like, oh, well, and just starts preening herself. And so I am just trying my best not to scare this penguin off because I'm so excited. And she's just sitting there. She sits for a minute, and then she hops on her way. And I had a couple years later, I was at a different site, again, waiting for a penguin with a logger. And I was sitting in the forest. This penguin was coming up. It's completely dark. All I hear is little penguin feet tapping. Same thing, just walks up into my lap, and it just stands there for a second preening. But this time, it was the right penguin. So I was just like, well, all right. I just grabbed her and, went about, took the logger off. So that was really, really cool. Being able to have one just hop in my lap, that's pretty cool. The other thing that is, I guess it's not a particular event, but every season something happens. There's some time where I'm able to just observe. I'm not trying to catch the penguin. I'm not trying to do anything to them, and they don't know that I'm there. I can just sit and watch them behave normally with not a care in the world about me. Often it's one of the things that always gets me is watching the penguins come into land. So seeing them in the ocean, porpoising in groups, maybe like leaping up onto the rocks. I saw a crested penguins one year landing. It was the day after like a big southerly storm, and the waves were incredible, just crashing into the rocks. And these penguins are having to climb up, to me, a completely imperceptible trail up the rock, pretty much vertical. They're using their beak to like climb their way up, and they get to this little rock platform. And then they have to quickly get around to go up a little bit higher before they're above the waves at this point, because the waves were so high. And this was probably, I don't know, good 10, 15 meters high that they had to get up. The waves were crashing over that. I saw these penguins, they worked so hard and got all the way up there. And I saw this big wave coming in. They're just like running, trying to hop their way up above the wave. And there's this one that was too slow. I see the wave coming. It just crashes all the way across. And you see the water just rushing. This penguin's up on the rocks, like trying to swim, try to stay up. And then it goes boop, right off into the ocean. Then it was fine. You see it. It dove under the wave, popped back up, waited for the wave to go back out, and just tried again. And it's just something about that. Just seeing them do what they're meant to do, seeing them fail, and then just keep going like nothing ever happened. They're just so good at being a penguin. I would have died, but
Oh, me as well, for sure.
it's just incredible. It's those moments of just getting to see them do what they do that makes it all worth it to me. It's just those experiences that they always stand out. And something like that happens every year, at least once, that just makes me just really, really happy with my life choices, I guess.
Thank you for sharing. I love both of the experiences you mentioned. You even gave me goosebumps. I felt like I was there with you in the
Well,
field.
I don't know if I posted it. I might have posted it on my Instagram, but I posted videos I think of that. I think I have a video of that penguin getting washed off.
Thank you again for sharing the lovely stories. And I would still go a little bit back to the conservation
Yep.
because, as we already talked about, like we need to look a little bit more individual at the even in the same group sometimes how we go around the conservations. And in your view, what's the most pressing conservation issue for penguins right now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. Um, Well, as I said, like penguins are facing so many problems right now. And those problems are very specific to where they are in some cases, even, individual colonies. But there's a couple that I think are pretty overarching that affect most, if not all, penguins. Number one is definitely climate change. That is a huge issue that every species is going to have to deal with, in particular penguins. So when we think about the Antarctic penguins, for example, changes in sea ice, changes in temperature are already starting to cause shifts in population numbers and distribution, and even what species are found in the Antarctic. The same thing happens in temperate zones. Those temperate penguins that maybe are currently doing fine or doing all right, there's some evidence that they may be even less resilient to changes in temperature, marine temperature, and changes in the ocean. Not across the board, but there's some evidence that might be the case for some of them. Climate change has so many trickle down effects that I think it has to be one of the main ones that we have to worry about. Another one, though, is definitely fisheries interactions. That is a big problem for many species of penguins and just marine life in general. Whether it is competition, overfishing for bait fish or reduction of krill is a major problem. You also have the danger of becoming bycatch, penguins getting caught in nets and drowning definitely happens still way more than it should, because it shouldn't happen at all, ideally. And then there's other things that maybe are less often thought about, and that's marine aquaculture. So sometimes there's for mussel farms or other shellfish farms, those can have major impacts on the benthic community and just the ecosystem as a whole. And that's kind of a static location that's being fundamentally altered. And for some species of penguins, especially those that are benthic foragers in these areas where you have these changes, it can be really affected by that. Salmon farms, that's another big one in that aquaculture realm. I know in the Falklands right now, there's a lot of pushback against salmon farms coming to the Falklands. It's been similar in New Zealand. That's, I think, another really big one. Climate change and fisheries are big threats.
In recent weeks, I was reading about the fisheries and the interactions, and yeah, it's a lot that we need to concern ourselves with
Yeah.
in terms of penguin
Yeah.
conservation.
And it's not that fisheries across the board are bad. And they're also a
Yeah.
fact of life. They're a livelihood for many people.
Mm.
Many of us eat, seafood, but there's ways to do it responsibly and sustainably and with wildlife in mind. And I think that's what we need to push for.
And if you would have a wave of magic and could change one policy or practice that would help penguins thrive, what would it be?
That's so hard. I guess in the most ideal situation, because it has so many trickle down effects, I think it would have to be the climate change issue. It'd have to be dealing with those and halting or reversing what we've already seen in terms of climate change. There's just so many things that are affected by that. I think that maybe would have the most impact.
There are also a lot of things that we can do as individuals just to help
Yes.
out. And it would help not only penguins, I mean, it would help in general the animal kingdom.
Yeah, there's so much that we can do individually for both of those, for climate change and for sustainable fisheries. Yeah, there's a lot that can be done to be more responsible and be more conscious in both regards. And I feel like anything that we can do has to be helpful for penguins and for the rest of wildlife and ourselves.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your online presence. As I already mentioned, I love your website. I love the field pictures. They are beautiful. I would be interested, like, what kind of responses do you get from people when you post about penguins and about the conservation issues?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you actually that you think that it's a good job on that front. J- pretty much only get positive reactions. I can't think of anything particularly negative that has happened. Like I said, everyone loves penguins. At least everyone appreciates penguins. They're
True.
charismatic. How could you not? I have definitely gotten people that are very surprised by various things that I post. For example, Talaki, a penguin in a rainforest, right? So nobody expects that. Um, y- there's a lot of people that are surprised by or the locations that I go to. They're just so excited to see all these new places that maybe they've never heard of before. Like nobody's heard of Antipodes Island outside of probably New Zealand or the science world.
Yes, I
You
can
know,
confirm that, at least from my side.
yeah, I mean, these places are remote, and it's not that we want everybody going there. They don't need to be developed or anything like that. But getting the word out that they exist, that there's penguins there and other seabirds, can't forget all the other animals there that deserve just as much protection and help as things on the mainland do, is important. And I think I've gotten a lot of people that have appreciated that they get to learn about new places and new species. I had one, this isn't at all about penguins, but I posted from one of this last season on Antipodes pictures of the two parakeet species that live on the island. And I got a lot of comments about the fact that there are parakeets on some Antarctic islands in New Zealand. Just exposing new people to new species and new places has been, I think, very positive.
I was surprised also about some of the seabirds that you posted in the pictures. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't know. Like, first of all, that such a seabird exists and that it lives there.
Yeah, I mean, the diversity on these islands is pretty cool. And also working now in both the South Pacific and South Atlantic, I see a lot. There's some birds that are the same between the two, but otherwise there's like a lot of unique diversity that I've been able to see between these two field sites, which is pretty cool.
And why is sharing your science with the public important to you?
Yeah, so honestly, I feel like in a lot of cases, the science you do is only as good as how much you can get it out there. It's only what you present and what people actually can consume and take home from it is what's important. You can do the best science in the world, but if nobody knows about it and nobody can actually learn from it to take action or whatever it may be, does it really matter all that much? So I think science communication, getting the word out there, making people care is a major part of our responsibility as scientists, especially working in conservation. We have to be able to make people aware of the issues and that animals face out in the wild before we can have anything done about it. People have to know about the problem, care about the problem to then do something about the problem. I think that's a big part for me is being able to tell that story in some way, shape, or form. I feel like I was inspired a lot by Thomas and the Talkie Project. His online presence is amazing. He's very, very good at it. I'm mediocre, but learning from him and seeing how much it has affected the Talkie Project and the success of that project for the better of penguin research and penguin populations in New Zealand, I think that really inspired me to try and be more active and show more, even just, like I said, those, silly little things that happen in the field, like walking around and be completely covered in penguin poop and sweaty and gross. People apparently like that. Makes it more of a connection, I guess. It's people actually doing this work.
It also shows what's real behind the scenes. It's
Yeah.
not just about taking pictures of cute penguins, but real work,
Real work.
efforts to get to the island, to unload
Yep.
everything.
I mean, I guess that's one of the probably the number one comment that I get from people, whether it's people that I know or just random people that are discovering, our stories, which is great. We love that. But one of the most common things I get is, are they cuddly? I want to pet a penguin, this sort of thing. I'm just like, I love that you're interested, but don't. You don't want to cuddle one and they don't want you to. So it's a good place to start having a conversation. But this idea that penguins are just cute little cuddly plush toys is not accurate, to say the least.
I heard stories about penguin beaks being
Oh,
really
yeah.
sharp.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know if you can see through here, but I have you can notice, but all of this is all down my arm is all
I see.
scars. Yeah, it's
A lot of scars on your hand.
all scars.
Okay.
Most of that's from Magellated penguins, actually. But yeah, all of them giving me some quite nasty bites. Albatrosses too. But I mean, you can't blame them. We're these giant things coming up and grabbing them and, taking a blood sample or putting a backpack on them. What else are you going to do? They have to do
I
something.
think I would bite as well if somebody comes to my house and
Yeah.
tries to put a tracker on me.
Yep. Yeah, it's honestly more strange to me when we're catching, I guess we catch geese in the Falklands as well, and the geese just sit there. They do not move, they do nothing, which I guess that's a different strategy. You just kind of play dead, but I find that really strange. Catching like skuas, for example, or the striated caracaras in the Falklands, but for predators, they also just sit there for the most part. I mean, sometimes they'll struggle a little bit or try to like fight back. For the most part, they also just sit there and they just more look confused as to what's happening. And I think it's a predator versus prey situation. So penguins are, in this case, they're a prey species. They're also predators of fish, but they're prey species. So they're fighting. If you don't fight, you die. So I get it. Versus the skuas, Caracaras, they are the predator. So I guess they're not used to having to defend themselves in that way. So I think they're just more like, huh, what what is happening? And by the time you're done, so that they just walk away and they just stand there like nothing ever happened.
That's interesting how different seabirds react to
Uh,
catching.
There's quite the range of responses. And we always, first and foremost, we're about the bird's safety and the bird's well-being.
Hmm.
So if an individual is clearly distressed, they go. We're not going to continue holding a bird. I have pretty strict rules for myself of how long I will handle a bird, and of course, you always have to be in tune with that bird at its stress level, because at the end of the day, that's what matters. The bird's well-being is the most important thing. We can get samples from other individuals, so the bird's well-being is what's important. But that being said, a lot of them, what we do with the penguins, I've almost never, a couple of times, but I've almost never had a penguin that I'm just like, okay, this we need to let this one go because it's getting too stressed. A canvas catch bag over their heads. So it's a nice dark area. They tend to be pretty calm once you do that. We are working really fast for the most part. If we're going good, we can do all the blood draws and swabbing and all the things we have to do in the course of 1 to 2 minutes. Usually takes a little bit longer to put on a GPS tracker. So we usually will split up putting on a device versus taking samples for that reason. But yeah, for the most part, it's a in and out done, and most of the birds are fine with it.
How many penguins can you process like this during a day?
Yeah, it depends what we're doing and on the species. In New Zealand, we tend to not do that many in a particular day because we have such a long season. We often tend to spread it out. So we'll do tracking of individuals at different times throughout the season. So with like the tracking, for example, we might put on maybe 7 to 10
Mm.
trackers at a time. Um, And that doesn't take very long. It takes an hour or two, depending on how many birds are available. Because you also want to pick a good bird that you are confident you'll get the tracker back from, even though that doesn't always happen. In the Falklands, we are doing a very different project. So in the Falklands, we are sampling essentially every bird species that's there, seabird wise and land bird wise, I guess. With that project, we are really focused at getting a big sample size for screening for diseases, particularly avian influenza. And because we've had so many outbreaks the last several years in the Falkland Islands, we need a lot of birds. So I would say my maximum, I guess, that I got this season in a day and processed through this would be getting blood samples, an oral swab and a cloacal swab, and then a few other things. I think the most I got in one day was maybe 80 or so birds. And that's of various species. That's Gentoo penguins, that's giant petrels, that's a bunch of species. Yeah,
That's still a lot of birds.
it was a busy day. Yeah, we were on an island where we were relatively time limited, and this was a day where we had multiple people helping us. It wasn't all just me, but yeah, it was two of us that were doing the sample collecting, and we had a couple other people that were helping as they could to maybe like catch a bird for us. Because we were working with a Falklands conservation, and they were actively banding albatrosses at that point in time. So we were kind of all working together with the banding effort and the sampling effort. Yes, I think that day we got around 80 or so samples taken. Very, very long day.
Sounds like a long day with
Yeah.
so many birds.
And long into the night processing those samples.
That's the second part of the
Yeah.
processing of the data.
Yeah. Yeah. You get so excited getting those samples during the day, and then you get back to the house at night and you're like, no, I have to do something with them.
The
But it's
work
fun.
continues.
It does. Never ends.
And looking into the future, where do you hope your work leads in the next few years?
I'm actually really excited about some upcoming work we have going in New Zealand. I recently was fortunate enough to get funded by Cornell's Lisa Yang Center for Wildlife Health. And from that funding, we're able to expand our work in eastern rockhoppers to include the other islands in the New Zealand subminority they occur on. So we're planning a big expedition. It's going to be this year, but there were some logistical challenges with the boat schedule. So we're pushing it back to next year. But a big expedition to Campbell Island to work on the eastern rockhoppers there, which hasn't really had a big effort on the rockhoppers other than some monitoring, which is also very important. But there hasn't been a big push on just the rockhoppers in the past about a decade or so. So it's really, really needed to go in there and see what those populations are looking like now. We're going to do some genetics on them as well, population genetics. We're going to look more into foraging ecology. We're going to put trackers on, all of the things. Big project. Also working on the Auckland Island group as well, and hopefully at some point expanding into the eastern rockhoppers on Macquarie Island, which is an Australian territory, to try and look at that entire region as a whole, to see how this rockhopper community is doing. Because at least based on our last knowledge of their numbers, they're doing bad. And we really want to see, is that still true? And see if we can figure out why they are struggling. So I'm really excited about that work, really grateful to have gotten funded for that. Very much looking forward to it. So that's the next big thing coming for us. Hopefully we'll see how it goes funding wise, but there's talks in our lab here at Cornell about some work on the Antarctic Peninsula as well, which would be super cool. And so hopefully in a few years, that might be also a possibility. But yeah, mostly this work in New Zealand is coming up, as I'm really excited about.
Sounds amazing, and congrats on the funding.
Thank you.
I will be looking forward to the published papers and your new field pictures.
Yeah, I'm excited. We'll be this season, again, because of those logistic challenges, I won't be in New Zealand this season, which is a very sad year for me. The Tawaki project is continuing on Antipodes Island, though, so definitely keep an eye out for updates from them. I will be back in the Falklands in January for a few months. We put out a bunch of trackers on brown skuas that I got to get back, hopefully. So a lot more work to come from the Falklands, so there should be plenty of updates in the spring from that.
I will look forward to the updates. And apart from the upcoming projects that you so much look forward to, are there any big questions that you are chasing?
Yeah, so I am always very interested in how different populations of penguins are connected, how different populations of penguins are foraging. And one big thing about that for me is, what are they doing outside the breeding season and what's happening with juveniles before they come back. So I would love to keep working on Fiordland penguins in particular, as well as the red crested and rockhoppers, and look at what they're doing outside of the breeding season. Hopefully going to incorporate that into the rockhopper project, do some tracking during the winter as well, because I am very suspicious that it's that winter period that is probably a big problem for them, but we'll find out. So yeah, these at-sea periods I think are really, really intriguing, and we need a lot more information for pretty much all of the penguin species, but especially the crested penguins. There's a huge gap there in our knowledge. And like I said, the second one is really what happens to juveniles. It seems like clearly for Tawaki, they're getting enough recruitment, enough juveniles are coming back because they're doing pretty good, maybe even expanding their population distribution. But for some of these other species, like the rockhoppers, like the red cresteds, we don't really know that much about their recruitment. And given the declines in their population, it seems that maybe that could be an issue. So it would be interesting to do some tracking of these juveniles after they fledge and just see, are they going to similar places as the adults? How many of them are making it back? And that's a long-term study, whether it's marking juveniles and resighting them or tracking. That's a little bit more complicated and definitely a long-term study, but definitely something I'd be interested in looking into in the future, because we just don't know.
This is actually an area where we really lack some information, data, or anything. So would be great to have some.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see. The biggest issue with a lot of these tracking, especially of juveniles, is tracking devices are expensive. I mean, juvenile animals in general don't necessarily have the best survival rates. So there's the issue of you're throwing very expensive equipment out on a bird that has a high chance of never returning to where you're going to be. But also, in my opinion, there's maybe a little bit of an ethical question there about putting devices on a juvenile bird that already is going to be having a tough time figuring out how to do everything it has to do already. And so is adding an extra weight, extra drag okay? I'm hoping that there will be some other ways that we can answer these questions without necessarily having to do that. But I think that's another reason that it's kind of not been done as frequently on juveniles. There's a lot more questions there logistically.
They will have a lot to figure out, and not to add an extra stressor for them.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to be a baby penguin,
It is, but they are tough as well.
They are. They really are. We see juveniles come back, for sure. Like, I've definitely seen juveniles. We've actually a couple years ago caught a juvenile Tawaki that we had microchipped, I think the year before. And I was like, oh, well, hello, I microchipped you. It's nice to see you again. But we've seen juveniles coming back, red crested penguins, for example. And it's really funny when they land, because they've been at sea for a very long time at this point, for the past year. And they land and they don't really know how to use feet anymore. We've seen them land on the rocks, and then they try to climb up the rocks by laying on their belly and doing their wings, flapping their wings. And it doesn't work that way. Seeing them remember how to use their feet It's pretty comical.
That must be cute. Now, my favorite questions I
Mhm.
ask everyone. What's your favorite penguin species and why?
Wow. Well, I get asked this question and I always struggle. They're all great, I have to say.
Agree.
I still have to go with Tawaki, Jordan Penguin. They're my first love. I've worked with them from my master's, my PhD. I have a big tattoo of one on my arm, and they're just so cool. They live in the rainforest. They are really good at what they do, raising chicks. They are so adaptable to different marine conditions and different habitats. They go on these crazy journeys for seemingly no reason during the pre-molt. They're just really weird and really cool. I like them a lot. Actually, erect cresteds, I love. The crest is so cool. It's so different. I think king penguins are absolutely gorgeous, but I think Tawaki still has to be it.
Yeah, they are actually cool. I remember when I learned that they are living in forest, I was like, okay, a penguin, a forest,
Yeah.
that's badass.
It is. And honestly, I think I got a little bit spoiled at the beginning of my introduction to penguins because my first experiences with penguin fieldwork was we hop on a cruise ship, we get a nice cruise of all of Milford Sound, which is this beautiful location that tourists are rave about. We get a little tourist boat ride, dropped off at a little floating building. We get in our kayaks, we kayak over to the colony. We just and I'm catching penguins in a rainforest and just the most beautiful place on earth. I mean, such a beautiful place. Yeah, but it's hard work. Don't get me wrong. It's still really difficult. The sandflies are horrendous, but it is very different. I was used to penguins being in tree root burrows and rock falls individually, not in a big colony. And so when I went to Southern Arctic for the first time, it's a lot tougher to get to, very exposed, but there's these huge colonies of birds there. That was very different, and having to navigate through this like sea of birds, and then going to the Falklands after that, where the size of the colonies is just incredible compared to uh, islands I've been on before, particularly of like albatrosses. There's just a sea of albatrosses as far as you can see on some of these islands. I had a very different view of what made penguin field work by starting on Tawaki. But yeah, it all has its major pluses, it all has its minuses, but yeah, it's still great no matter where you do it.
You tried all the field work there is with penguins, so
Well, I haven't got to Antarctica yet. I haven't got the Antarctic experience.
it's
Maybe
waiting
one
for
day.
you. I
I
can
hope
feel it
so.
is waiting for you.
We'll see. I hope so.
And what is one small thing someone listening right now can do to help protect penguins and seabirds?
I guess no matter where you are, just simple things like being responsible with your seafood choices
Mm.
and being responsible and conscious of your plastic and emissions use. All of those things kind of feed into these broader issues like climate change, like fisheries. And if we as individuals can make good choices and do our best, the more of us that do that, I think the bigger chance we have of actually making a difference. But even just realizing that your plastic waste, for example, in the US or in Europe can find its way to a beach in the Falkland Islands or a remote island off of Antarctica. Hopefully that makes you a little bit more conscious of what you're doing and your impact on the broader ecosystem of the entire world, not just your local one.
Yes, thank you. I will keep that in mind, and I hope everyone else who's listening as well. And just to finish it up, where can folks follow you, follow your work, support the mission? If you could
Yeah,
again mention maybe your beautiful website,
yeah,
any
of course.
social media.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can find me social media on Instagram. It's at Jeff_White618. Also on Blue Sky at Jeff W. White. My website is jeffwwhite.com. So all of my information is on those. Even if you just go to the website, you can get everything else from there. I would also recommend following the Tawaki Project and the Tawaki Trust, both based out of New Zealand. And sole purpose and mission of the Tawaki Trust is the conservation of crested penguins in New Zealand. And always from that, you can follow what we're doing, get updates, and also there are opportunities to donate if you feel the need to via Patreon and other sources. Also on Facebook, you can follow Falklands Wildlife Health. We will post a lot while we're in the field, the entire team, to keep updates on what's happening with our Falklands project. Yeah. Those are the main places to find me and some of my collaborators. I love having people follow along and see what we're doing and, be excited about penguins and seabirds.
Thank you. I will link everything in the show notes.
Perfect.
So thank you again for your time. It was lovely to talk about penguins. I again learned a lot new things, especially about crested penguins. And I will be looking forward to your work, to some new papers you publish, to the field pictures. Already excited.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
And that's it for today's episode. Thank you again to Dr. Jeff White for his time and all the insights he shared. And thank you all for listening. If you liked the episode, don't forget to follow the podcast, leave a review, or share the episode with someone who loves penguins or simply enjoys great conversations. Stay cool, and I will catch you in the next episode.
Join us in their world where every moment's a surprise. Oh, penguin paradise, where the penguins dance and sing under the watchful eyes of the sun. They live a life so fine. From the Arctic to Antarctica, their stories take flight in penguin paradise.